I have essentially two stories to tell about women and girls in our world. The first story is the old story, one that is still tragically true in many places around the world, and that is the story of the abuses, the human rights abuses suffered by all too many women and girls. Then I want to tell the newer story, which is about how women themselves are changing this grim landscape and how that benefits all of us. Now, the fact is that wherever people are suffering, whether it's from poverty, disease, persecution, or the ravages of war, women and girls almost always suffer most. Women and girls often have to stand aside while boys and men are given priority for limited food or access to education. Education is a universal human right, but women are more likely than men to be illiterate. A large majority of the world's very poorest people are women. Laws and more usually customs limit women's ability to inherit our own land, especially in Africa and Asia. More than 70% of all human trafficking victims are women and girls, and most of them are destined for forced marriage or for the sex trade. Child brides are still tragically common. There are at least 250 million women in the world today who were married before they turned 15, and millions were married even younger. In some countries, girls who have had sex, even if they were raped, may be murdered with impunity by their own brothers or fathers to avenge the family's honor. One of the most dangerous abuses of girls is female genital mutilation, or FGM. Years ago, speaking at a convention of religious leaders, former President Jimmy Carter said, and this is a quote, "The truth is that male religious leaders have had and still have an option to interpret holy teachings either to exalt or subjugate women. They have, for their own selfish ends, overwhelmingly chosen the latter." So it is crucial to engage religious leaders in combating abuses of women. And in fact, the nonprofit founded by President Carter, the Carter Center, where I worked until recently, works in West Africa with religious leaders to discourage practices that masquerade as religion. I said masquerade as religion. And that includes FGM, early forced marriage, or honor killing. One interesting outcome was that many Muslim and Christian religious leaders actually became convinced that neither the Quran nor the Bible actually endorses FGM. But war is the greatest violator of human rights, and especially women's rights. In today's conflicts, women are vulnerable to rape and assault by marauding troops, often as a deliberate act of terrorism. To be fair, no one has rights in a war zone, but in particular, the rights of women and girls are trampled. Now, what I've just told you is a very condensed version of the old story, powerful and still tragically true, of women as victims of human rights abuses and of war. These abuses represent a terrible injustice, and frankly, COVID is only making things harder for women around the world. But violence against women, it turns out, is bad not only for women, but for men as well. I'll give you a few examples. In her book, Sex and World Peace, Valerie Hudson demonstrated that the very best predictor of a state's overall peacefulness is how well its women are treated. Closing the gender gap in education adds significantly to a nation's economic production, and those benefits are shared by boys and men. And in fact, we've known for years that the very best thing a country can do to speed up its economic development is to educate its girls. And I think this has been proven, when women work, they invest 90% of their income back into their families, compared with 35% for men. And we're talking about women in developing countries there. So ending violence and discrimination against women is good for everyone. But it's not enough just to end the victimization of women. It's when women become actors, solving our common problems, that things really start to change. I'm going to give just two examples, and one is the impact women can have on ending wars, and the other is the impact they can have on finding solutions to climate change. As you might imagine, women are very rarely included in negotiations to end conflicts in their own countries, even though they suffer so much from those conflicts. Yet we know from recent examples that peace agreements reached through a process that does include women are more likely to last than agreements reached solely among combatant men. It's hard to get women invited to the peace table, but women are not waiting to be asked to make peace. There are courageous women in Nigeria, in Somalia, in Yemen, in Syria, and all around the world risking their lives as I speak to prevent conflict and make peace. And these are some of the heroines of the new story. Empowering and including women is also critical to solving the most pressing problem of our time, the climate crisis. Here again, we have the story of women as victims and the new story of women as agents of change. Women are especially vulnerable to the effects of climate change due to their poverty and to their dependence on natural resources. 80% of the people displaced by climate change are, in fact, women and girls. Climate-related natural disasters take an acute toll on women. I'll give you just one example. You may not realize that women who lose their homes in a natural disaster are more likely to be sexually assaulted. But while women suffer more from climate change, they also have the knowledge needed to come up with practical solutions. In many places, women grow the crops and fetch the water, so they are well placed to spot climate-based threats to their family's sustenance. Women often pioneer or adopt new agricultural techniques, and they are often first responders in crises. In these roles, and as decision makers at home, women offer valuable homegrown solutions to better manage the climate and its risks. I want to be clear, conflict resolution and climate change are just two areas where the potential of women to help solve problems is still largely untapped. We certainly need to put an end to the old story of abuses of women and girls. But we also need to go one step further and empower women to change the world in ways that will benefit all of us. That is the new story. Thank you very much. Women's rights are human rights, and human rights are worth the fight.